Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I want to start by asking you a question. What if the most agonizing pain in your life right now, your anxiety, your burnout, that quiet misery that keeps you awake at 2 in the morning, what if that is not actually a psychological problem? What if it is an act of high treason?
Yeah, that is a staggering premise to open with, honestly.
Right, because usually when we talk about diagnosing a problem, there is this expectation of clinical precision. I mean, you break your arm, the doctor puts you in an x-ray machine, the film shows that jagged white line, and they just point at it. It is broken or not broken.
Exactly. It is a clean binary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it is comforting, We like things to be visible, categorized, and easily fixed with a cast and 6 weeks of rest. But then you step into the unseen world of the human soul, and suddenly that x-ray machine just shatters.
It really does. You are left with nothing clean or simple.
Exactly. We find ourselves looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky, chaotic, and resistant to easy answers. So today, we are going on a deep dive into the absolute root of the human condition. We have a fascinating stack of sources in front of us, anchored by the writings of A.W. Tozer, and a meticulous, ground-up exegesis of Psalm 57, verse 5.
Which is going to be amazing to unpack.
I agree. Our mission today is to analyze the deepest disorder of the human soul and uncover the path to restoring the proper creator-creature relationship.
And that diagnosis is precisely where we have to start. Because the premise we are working with today is just, well, it is massive.
It really is.
The sources argue that human misery does not stem from a simple misunderstanding. It is not a lack of self-esteem or a chemical imbalance or a failure to realize your full potential.
Right. Is it not something you can fix with a vision board?
No, not at all. The root issue is a radical moral dislocation. I mean, we live, breathe, and act as if God exists for us rather than acknowledging the objective, undeniable reality that we exist for him.
Wow. Yeah, that flips the whole script.
It really does. When we talk about the human crisis, we have to recognize that we are dealing with a total disorder of worship. The human soul was never created to be a self-originating, self-defining, or self-governing entity.
Right. We were not made to run our own universe.
Precisely. Man was made by God, from God, through God, and for God. Yet, the creature has taken the structure of the cosmos and flipped it entirely upside down. We are basically demanding that the creator adjust himself to the creature's preferences.
And in a modern world that is absolutely saturated with self-help books, life hacks, and the relentless pursuit of personal autonomy, this deep dive is going to challenge the most basic assumptions you hold about who is actually sitting on the throne of the universe.
It's going to be incredibly confronting for a lot of people, I think.
Absolutely. But before we can even begin to talk about a remedy, we have to look at the disease. I mean, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. We need to move to the Garden of Eden to understand the specific nature of humanity's brokenness.
Yeah, Eden is where the entire framework gets set.
Right. And when you read the sources on this, they reframe the fall of man in a way that shatters our modern sensibilities. The fall was not a passive mistake. It was not a naive misstep by a couple people who just did not know any better.
No, it was high treason.
Exactly. Our sources reference the original contract made in Eden, which is often called the covenant of works. Adam was not just an isolated individual making a bad dietary choice.
Right. The apple or the fruit is not really the main issue.
Exactly. He was acting as the federal head, the legal representative of all humanity, and in that role, he attempted an ontological coup d'etat.
That phrase, an ontological coup d'etat, is the perfect way to describe it. I mean, Adam looked at the structure of reality, where God alone determines good and evil, and decided he wanted that authority for himself.
He wanted to be the boss.
He wanted to be the self-defining arbiter of truth. To grasp the sheer magnitude of that catastrophic event, we really have to look closely at the concept of total depravity.
Which is a heavy term. What does that actually mean in this context?
Well, when Adam fell, human nature did not just become weak. It did not just sustain an injury that needed a crutch. Human nature became actively hostile to God's rule.
So it is an active rebellion, not just a passive weakness.
Yes, precisely. We became wholly defiled in all the faculties and parts of the soul and body. Think about what that means practically. The intellect became darkened.
Meaning we cannot even think straight about spiritual things.
Right. That means we do not just occasionally misunderstand things. Our default setting is to suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Our minds actively fight against the reality of God.
That is terrifying, honestly.
It is, and it gets worse because the affections became perverted too. We naturally love the things we should hate, and we naturally hate the things we should love.
Wow, so our compass is just completely backwards.
Completely shattered. Because Adam acted as our legal representative, that guilt and that inherent corruption were imputed to the entire human race. We're born into this world demanding that reality bend to our preferences.
I think of it like a solar system. Imagine a tiny, fragile planet out on the edge of the system, deciding it wants to be the sun.
Oh, that is a great analogy.
Thanks. It looks at the massive burning star at the center, the star that provides all the heat, light, and gravity holding everything together, and this little rock says, no, I should be the center of gravity. Everything should orbit around me.
Which is literal physical insanity.
Right. The resulting gravitational chaos does not just hurt that tiny planet. It throws the entire system into a catastrophic, unnatural spin. The planets crash into one another, the orbits are destroyed, and the system literally tears itself apart.
That is such a vivid picture of sin.
Yeah, that is what happens when the human ego tries to occupy the center of reality. The mass of the human soul is simply not large enough to hold the universe together. The resulting chaos, the relational crashes, the societal breakdown, that is what we call human history.
Absolutely. The evidence is on every page of the newspaper.
Exactly. So I want to ask you about this. If we are looking at a massive structural collapse, how does this view of the fall completely upend the modern therapeutic ideas of salvation that we see everywhere today?
Well, it upends it completely because the therapeutic view of salvation treats human sin as a disease of the emotions.
Like it is just a feelings problem.
Right. It assumes that man is fundamentally good at his core, but perhaps he's been wounded by his environment, traumatized by his upbringing, or just, lacks self-actualization.
So you just need a little encouragement.
Exactly. If that therapeutic view is accurate, then salvation is just a matter of adjusting our feelings, getting better coping mechanisms, and optimizing our human potential.
Just leveling up your life, basically.
Yeah, basically. But if the biblical view is accurate, if the fall was a deliberate act of high treason and a catastrophic moral dislocation, then therapy is like putting a small bandage on a decapitation.
Oh, wow. That is a brutal image, but very accurate.
It is the only way to express the gravity of it. Salvation cannot be the improvement of religious feeling or the boosting of self-esteem. It must be a total sovereign intervention from the outside.
Because the system cannot fix itself.
Right. The legal claims of that broken contract in Eden must be fully satisfied, and the polluted, hostile nature of the rebel must be supernaturally regenerated. The creature must be brought to his knees, utterly stripped of his illusion of autonomy, and reconciled to the Creator through a substitute.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
It is. True salvation reestablishes the absolute lordship of God in the soul. It corrects that gravitational chaos you mentioned by taking the tiny rogue planet and forcibly returning it to its proper designated orbit around the true sun.
Which brings us to the next massive concept here. Since human autonomy creates that catastrophic chaos, order can only be restored by returning to a fixed, unmovable center.
Yes, you have to have a center.
Right, you cannot stabilize a collapsing solar system by negotiating with the rogue planet. You have to return to the sun. This brings our deep dive directly into the nature of God himself. We are looking at the doctrine of divine aseity.
Which is one of the most glorious doctrines we can study.
It really is. Aseity is a theological term coming from the Latin esse, meaning from himself. It refers to God's absolute self-existence. When God speaks to Moses from the burning bush, he says, I am that I am.
He does not say, I am what my environment made me.
Exactly. He does not define himself in relation to anything else. The sources describe this beautifully, noting that God possesses all life, glory, goodness, and blessedness in and of himself.
He is entirely self-sufficient.
Right. He is alone, in and unto himself, all-sufficient. He does not stand in need of any creatures which he has made. He does not need us. He is entirely, absolutely self-contained.
That doctrine of aseity is the absolute linchpin of reality. God is the uncaused cause. Everything else in the universe is contingent.
Contingent meaning dependent, right?
Yes, dependent. You and I are contingent beings. We depend on a million different factors just to survive the next 5 minutes. We need oxygen in our lungs. We need atmospheric pressure to keep our bodies from exploding. We need water, food, and the sustaining will of the Creator just to take our next breath.
We are incredibly fragile.
We are intensely needy. But God needs absolutely nothing. He is the absolute reality. But what is fascinating, and honestly quite tragic, is the modern tendency to create a domesticated deity.
Oh man, a domesticated deity. That sounds terrible.
It is. Fallen man inherently hates the idea of an absolute, self-existent sovereign who owes him nothing. So we try to modify God. We see pragmatic, seeker-sensitive movements that look at the surrounding culture and ask, well, what kind of God would people like to buy?
Like a marketing focus group for the divine.
Exactly. And they end up creating a deity who is essentially a needy companion, a desperate boyfriend waiting anxiously for us to swipe right and let him into our lives.
Wow. Yeah, that is incredibly common today.
It is everywhere. And then prosperity theology takes it even further into absolute absurdity, treating the Almighty as a cosmic vending machine.
Right. Put your faith in. Get your blessing out.
You put in your faith token, you declare your positive words, and out pops your earthly comfort, your health, and your wealth. And then on another front, mysticism tries to locate divinity entirely within the human experience, reducing the God of the cosmos to a fleeting emotional impression.
So all of these are just ways to avoid bearing down.
Yes, all of these movements are deliberate attempts to make God palatable to the rebel. They are attempts to keep the human ego securely on the throne while utilizing God as a cosmic butler to fetch our desires.
You know, I want to push back on this a little bit, or at least play devil's advocate for the listener who might be struggling with this concept.
Sure, let us hear it.
In our culture, we highly value flexibility, compromise, and adaptability. I mean, we are taught in every corporate seminar and psychology blog that good leaders adapt to their followers, right?
Yeah, that is the prevailing wisdom.
We are taught that rigid people are toxic and that good relationships require mutual compromise. So, when we encounter a God who declares, "I change not," it feels abrasive.
It definitely offends our modern sensibilities.
It does. It sounds dictatorial. So why is a God who refuses to adapt to our terms, a God who is entirely inflexible, actually the only sane anchor for the human soul?
It is a brilliant question because it exposes the flaw in how we project human limitations onto the divine. We value flexibility in human leaders because human leaders are flawed.
Right. They do not know everything.
They do not have all the information, they make mistakes, and circumstances change around them. A human leader who refuses to adapt is foolish because he is ignoring new data.
He is just being stubborn.
Exactly. But God possesses all knowledge, all wisdom, and absolute perfection. If God were to adapt to our terms, he would cease to be God.
Oh, that makes sense, because he is already perfect.
Think about the logic of change. If a being changes, it means they're either moving from a state of imperfection toward a state of perfection, or they're degrading from perfection toward imperfection.
And neither of those can apply to God.
Neither is possible for an absolute, eternal being. If God were flexible, if he adapted to cultural moods, our universe would be built on shifting sand. You could never trust a single promise he made because his mood, his theology, or his plans might change tomorrow based on a new demographic poll.
That would be absolutely terrifying.
It would be a nightmare. The unchangeableness of God, his absolute terrifying inflexibility, is actually the bedrock of your security. When the massive storms of life hit, when the gravitational chaos of our own sin or the sins of others threatens to tear our lives apart, we do not need a God who shifts with the cultural winds.
We need a rock.
We do not need a God who simply empathizes with our rebellion and offers a compromise. We need a fixed point. The absolute beginning of sanity is realizing that God will never compromise his holiness to accommodate your sin and finding your highest joy in the fact that his decrees are eternal, unshakable, and infinitely good.
That is incredibly helpful. So it is easy to talk about this absolute submission in a sterile academic setting. We can sit here in a studio, drink our coffee, and nod our heads about the immutability of God.
Right. It sounds great on paper.
But what happens when the universe actually is crashing down on you? Let us look at a historical stress test for this theology. This high theology of an absolute self-existent God was forged in the dirt and shadows of a literal cave.
It is such a dramatic shift in scenery.
It really is. We are moving now to the historical context of Psalm 57. The setting here is circa 1015 BC. David, the newly anointed king of Israel, is fleeing the murderous rage of the current reigning monarch, King Saul.
And this is not a metaphorical flight.
No, David is literally hiding in the desolate cave systems of Adullam or En-Gedi. We are talking about a dark, damp, terrifying environment. He's surrounded by a ragtag group of men who the text says were distressed, in debt, and discontented.
Not exactly a royal court.
Not at all. He is being hunted like an animal by the state military. He holds the absolute promise of God that he will be the king, but his current physical reality looks like complete abandonment.
The contrast between Saul and David in this historical moment is one of the most striking character studies in all of Scripture.
I agree. It is fascinating to look at them side by side.
Saul represents the tragic counterimage of a creature refusing submission. He was elevated to the kingship by God's sheer grace, but the moment he got the throne, he treated it as his own possession.
He forgot who actually owned the kingdom.
He grasped at authority. He feared the opinions of the people more than he feared the command of God. When his kingdom was threatened by David's rising popularity, Saul descended into severe paranoia, bitter envy, and irrational violence.
I mean, the guy was throwing spears at musicians.
Exactly. Saul is the vivid picture of the rogue planet tearing itself apart under the weight of its own ego. David, on the other hand, represents restored creatureliness. He has been anointed by Samuel the prophet. He knows the throne belongs to him by divine decree.
Right, he has the theological guarantee.
Yet when he has the opportunity to assassinate Saul in the cave, when Saul literally walks into the very cave where David is hiding, completely vulnerable, David refuses to strike.
Which makes no sense from a worldly perspective.
None at all.
Yeah.
His men are whispering in his ear, telling him this is a gift from God, telling him to take the throne. But David chooses to wait for God's redemptive timing. He refuses to secure the promise of God by breaking the law of God.
And the stakes in that cave are massive. I mean, this is not just a political dispute over taxation or territory. This is not just two rival factions fighting for a crown. Saul's attack on David was a targeted satanic assault on the messianic line.
That is a crucial point to understand.
Yeah, go back to the Garden of Eden. God made a covenant promise that the true king, the seed of the woman, would eventually come and crush the serpent's head. That promise was narrowed down through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and eventually the tribe of Judah, specifically resting on the line of David.
So this is about cosmic history, not just Israel's politics.
Exactly. If Saul manages to kill David in that cave, the covenantal promise of the Messiah is severed. The geopolitical and covenantal stakes are as high as they can possibly be. It makes me think of a dark room where photographs are developed.
Oh, I like that comparison.
You know, you need the absolute absence of light to bring out the clearest, sharpest picture on that negative. If you expose the film to the light of day too early, before the chemicals have done their work, the image is completely ruined.
It just washes out.
Right. David is sitting in the dark room of affliction. He does not wait until he's sitting comfortably in a cedar palace in Jerusalem to declare God's supremacy. He writes Psalm 57 and declares the cosmic exaltation of God while the threat of death is imminent, while his stomach is empty, and while his political reality looks entirely hopeless.
That physical, historical setting validates the theology completely. If David had written Psalm 57 after he was crowned king, after all his enemies were buried, after the borders were secure, we might dismiss the psalm as the easy, cheap praise of a comfortable man.
Right. Anyone can praise God when they have a full bank account and a safe house.
Exactly. But he writes it in the dirt. The cave becomes a brutal school of restored creatureliness. It trains the believer to interpret their present distress entirely through the lens of divine supremacy.
That is a hard school to attend.
Very hard. The Lord very often teaches his servants absolute submission before he ever grants them public visibility. The king must learn to bow to the true king before he is ever allowed to reign over the people.
Wow. That is a heavy truth.
David's faith in that dark room proves that his joy is not tethered to his changing circumstances. It is tethered securely to the unmovable center of God's absolute rule.
Well, let us step inside that historical cave and look at the text itself, because David utters a phrase that forms the theological hinge of the entire psalm. It provides the specific remedy to humanity's treason.
Yes, this is where we get to the core of it.
If we break down the structure of Psalm 57, the text moves from an urgent, visceral lament in the opening verses, where David is taking refuge from enemies he vividly describes as lions with spears and arrows for teeth.
A very poetic, very terrifying description.
Very. And it moves from that to this sweeping cosmic praise in the final verses. But right in the middle, forming the central axis of the psalm, is verse 5. He says, "Be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let thy glory be above all the earth." The entire psalm pivots on this single, staggering declaration.
To fully grasp the sheer weight of that pivot, we need to dive into the Hebrew exegesis of verse 5.
I am really looking forward to this part.
The verb translated as be exalted is room. In the Hebrew grammar, this is formatted as a command, specifically a cohortative imperative, but it describes a very specific type of elevation.
So it is not just a generic word for going up.
No, David bypassed several other common Hebrew words he could have used. He did not use the word nasa, which means a passive lifting or carrying, like a man lifting a box or carrying a child.
Like something you have to help lift.
Right. And he did not use gal, which means growing in physical size or quantity. He intentionally chose room, which conveys a majestic, self-initiating rising that demands absolute, terrifying awe from the creature.
Wow. That changes the flavor of the prayer entirely.
It really does. It is the language of a sovereign monarch taking his rightful, uncontested seat over the cosmos. And then he pairs that verb with the noun katho for glory.
Kato, that is a great word. What does the root mean?
The ancient root of katho signifies weight, heaviness, or absolute substance. This stands in direct, mocking contrast to the fleeting, weightless vanity of human pride.
Because pride is just air.
Exactly. Human egos, even the ego of a king like Saul, are like vapor. They dissipate in the wind. But God's glory is a crushing, unyielding weight of objective reality.
So David is praying that the massive, objective weight of God's reality would manifest itself over the entire earth. And by doing this in the ancient Near East, he is deliberately pushing back against the pagan culture of his day.
Yes, he is making a massive geopolitical statement.
We see in the sources that David is subverting local Canaanite theology. The ancient world was filled with territorial deities. You had the god of the mountain, the god of the valley, the god of the river, the god of the harvest.
I basically had a god for every zip code.
Exactly. If you fought a battle in the hills, you prayed to the hill god. But David declares a cosmic global monotheism. Yahweh is not a local mountain deity confined to the geopolitical borders of Israel. He's exalted above the highest heavens, and his sheer weight must fill all the earth.
Which means the local gods are nothing.
Right. The pagan nations have zero security in their territorial idols because Yahweh holds the deed to the entire map.
That subversion of ancient paganism is brilliant, but we have to recognize how it also subverts our modern paganism.
Oh, we definitely have our own brand of paganism today.
We do. We might not have bronze statues in our living rooms, but we absolutely tend to assign God to specific, limited territories in our lives.
Yeah.
We have the God of Sunday morning. We have the God of our internal religious feelings. We have the God of family values.
They compartmentalize him.
We try to keep him confined to those safe, manageable borders. We tell him, you can have my Sunday morning, but stay out of my bank account, stay out of my internet browser, and stay out of my career ambitions.
We want a localized deity.
But David shatters that completely. God's glory is above all the earth. Every single square inch of creation, including every hidden corner of your private life, is claimed by his sovereign weight.
I want to stop and look at the order of David's prayer, because this is where my mind gets stuck. He is sitting in a damp cave. There are literal killers outside hunting him.
His life is literally seconds away from ending, potentially.
Right. He does not start by saying, relieve my suffering right now. He does not say, strikes all dead with lightning. He bypasses his immediate physical danger and says, exalt yourself.
Which is such a counterintuitive response to trauma.
It really is. How does shifting the priority from our immediate physical safety to God's global reputation actually settle a panicked mind? Because human psychology tells us that in a state of panic, we get tunnel vision on our own survival. How does looking away from the threat toward the glory of God calm the nervous system?
It sells the mind because it fundamentally reorders reality. Panic occurs when we believe our physical safety or our reputation or our financial security is the ultimate good in the universe, and we see that ultimate good being threatened.
Right. If my comfort is God and my comfort is threatened, then God is dying.
Exactly. If my survival is the most critical thing in existence and Saul is standing outside the cave trying to kill me, I have every logical reason to be terrified. My universe is collapsing. But David deliberately shifts the priority. He recognizes that God's global reputation, the undeniable manifestation of his glory, is the actual ultimate good.
It is the only thing that cannot be threatened.
Yes. When David prays, "Be thou exalted," he's taking his own life, his own fears, and his own future, and placing them entirely underneath the umbrella of God's purposes. He is saying, Lord, if my deliverance from this cave brings you glory, then deliver me. But if my death in this cave brings you glory, then let my blood be a testimony to your greatness.
Wow. That is an unshakable position to be in.
When your highest goal is the glory of a God who absolutely cannot fail, your mind finds an unshakable peace. You are no longer trying to control the uncontrollable. You've handed the throne back to the rightful king, and you can rest knowing the king always secures his own glory.
David's submission in the cave was incredibly beautiful, but as we look at the sweep of redemptive history, it was just a shadow. It was pointing forward.
Yes, all of the Old Testament points forward.
The true, perfect fulfillment of this creator-creature realignment happens in the New Testament. Christ is the true Davidic King who entered the absolute darkest cave of human history. David faced physical death in a limestone cavern, but Christ faced the infinite holy wrath of God.
The contrast and the scale of their suffering is unimaginable.
It is. We see this climax at the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus, sweating drops of blood under the crushing anticipation of the cross, prayed, "Not my will, but thine be done." In that garden, Christ achieved the perfect, flawless, creaturely submission that Adam completely failed to offer in the Garden of Eden.
It is a stunning reversal of Eden.
Adam, surrounded by paradise, grasped at equality with God. Christ, who possessed equality with God, humbled himself, took on the form of a servant, and walked into the curse. And then, standing in the shadow of the cross, he cried out, "Father, glorify thy name." He took the crucifixion, the most horrific, shameful instrument of Roman torture ever devised, and turned it into the ultimate theater of God's exaltation.
The contrast between those two figures, the first Adam and the second Adam, is the absolute hinge of all redemptive history.
It is the entire story of the Bible.
The first Adam, living in paradise with every conceivable need met, chose treason. The second Adam, the Lord Jesus Christ, living in a cursed, broken world, facing betrayal, torture, and death, chose absolute, joyful submission.
It is so moving to think about it that way.
When we talk about how salvation operates to fix the moral dislocation we diagnosed at the beginning of our deep dive, we have to clearly distinguish between forensic justification and progressive sanctification.
Okay, let us break those terms down because they are crucial.
Forensic justification is a legal term. Think of a courtroom. It means that God the judge pardons the guilty sinner and declares him legally righteous. He does this not because the sinner has suddenly become a good person, but entirely on the basis of Christ's perfect obedience and his substitutionary death.
So it's an external righteousness applied to us.
Right. Christ stepped in, took the punishment, and satisfied the infinite demands of divine justice. The debt is completely paid. The legal ledger is cleared. That is justification.
And we have to be extremely clear about how this biblical reality differs from other systems of thought, because getting this wrong alters the entire basis of faith. There are massive errors on both sides of this doctrine.
The theological ditches on either side of the road are deep.
Very deep. On one side, you have the system found in Roman Catholicism, where justification is confounded with infused righteousness. They teach that God makes you internally righteous over time through participating in the sacraments, and your legal standing before God depends on that internal moral change.
Which is a heavy, heavy burden to carry.
It completely destroys the objective assurance of the gospel, because your standing is always fluctuating based on your performance. You can never truly know if you've done enough.
Because you never have done enough.
Right. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the error of antinomianism, which completely divorces the legal pardon from the requirement of personal holiness. They say, well, I'm legally forgiven, grace covers everything, so it does not matter how I live my life. Both of those extremes fail to understand the true nature of the remedy.
That is a critical distinction. The biblical framework holds justification and sanctification as distinct yet completely inseparable.
Like heat and light coming from the sun.
Exactly. While justification is an instantaneous, once-for-all legal declaration in the courtroom of heaven, progressive sanctification is the ongoing experiential work of the Holy Spirit, actively renewing the heart on earth.
Changing our actual desires and habits.
The Spirit takes the objective, finished accomplishment of Christ on the cross and applies it to the inner life of the believer. The intellect, which was darkened, is illuminated to understand the truth. The affections, which were perverted, are reordered to actually love the things of God. The will is freed from the total bondage of sin.
The whole person is renovated.
The rebel is not just handed a pardon and left to his own devices. He is given an entirely new nature that actually desires to declare, "Be thou exalted." The legal change makes reconciliation possible. The experiential change makes it a living, breathing reality in the life of the Christian.
One of the sources uses the analogy of the prodigal son to illustrate this shift, and I think it is the perfect picture of what we are discussing. The prodigal son demanded his absolute autonomy. He looked at his father, essentially wished him dead to get his inheritance, took the money, went to a far country, and completely ruined his life.
He lived out the ultimate autonomous fantasy, and it crushed him.
He hit rock bottom. When he finally comes to his senses and returns to his father, it is not a negotiation. He does not walk up the driveway and say, "Let us work out a trade agreement. I will work 3 days a week if you give me a room."
He's not trying to maintain leverage.
Not at all. It is a total, devastating collapse of self-will. He says, "I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." He surrenders all his perceived rights. He abandons his autonomy. But instead of being met with slavery, he is met with a massive restorative embrace from the father.
It is such a beautiful picture of grace.
The legal standing of sonship is restored immediately, and the experiential joy of the feast follows. But here's the massive practical question for you, the listener. We have talked about huge theological concepts. We have talked about Eden, the cosmos, federal headship, and the cross.
Very lofty, high-altitude theology.
Right. So if Christ already secured the victory, if the legal pardon is finished and the Spirit is doing the work, how does a believer practically mortify their own pride on a Tuesday morning at the office? How do you take this massive theology of kato, the weight of God, and apply it to an overflowing email inbox?
Mortifying pride on a Tuesday morning means deliberately bringing your whole personality into conformity with God's creational bounds. It starts with recognizing the incredibly subtle, everyday ways we demand the throne.
Because it is usually not a massive, overt rebellion on a Tuesday.
No, it is subtle. Let us look at a real example. You send an email, and your boss replies, copying the whole team, and unfairly criticizes your work. What is your immediate, visceral, internal reaction?
Oh, my heart rate spikes immediately.
Right. You feel a rush of anger. You have an overwhelming desire to hit reply all, defend yourself, and crush their reputation to protect your own. That physiological reaction is the rogue planet trying to reassert its gravity.
Wow. I never thought of an email spat as a cosmic rebellion, but it is.
Mortification means taking that specific heated moment, stepping back and saying, my reputation is not the unmovable center of the universe. God's glory is. It means rejecting the world's highly organized system of self-worship.
Which is very hard to do when the world cheers for self-worship.
We live in an era of expressive individualism that tells you to assert your dominance, to define your own truth, and to aggressively demand your rights. The restored creature recognizes that his true dignity is not found in winning the email argument.
So where is it found?
His true dignity is found in joyful submission to the providence of God, even when that providence includes an annoying coworker, an unfair boss, or a delayed project.
What we are talking about here is repenting of functional atheism. This is a massive issue. We might have perfectly orthodox theology in our heads. We might affirm all the historic creeds on Sunday. But functionally, from Monday to Saturday, we live out our lives as if God does not exist.
That is a piercing observation. We act like orphans.
We make our career the absolute center of our joy and our identity. We treat our family as an idol that must be protected and elevated at all costs, even if it means compromising our ethical integrity at work to provide for them.
We justify sin by calling it provision.
We let our desire for physical comfort and entertainment completely dictate our schedule, allowing those things to rival the commands of God. Or consider how we view the complementarian order of creation, the specific roles God designed for male and female in the home and the organization of the church.
That is a massive flashpoint in our current culture.
We often look at those boundaries and recoil because the culture screams at us that any limits on our self-expression are oppressive. But the sources are crystal clear on this point. The creature does not lose his dignity by bowing to the Creator's design. We actually find our true dignity right there in the bowing.
The modern rejection of the complementarian order is a perfect, glaring example of our culture's absolute hostility to creational bounds. Modern man views any restriction on his autonomy as an act of violence against his personal identity.
Right. Boundaries are seen as abuse.
But God is the sovereign owner. We are the dependent property. He designed the exact architecture of human flourishing. When we rebel against his design, whether that is in the structure of the family, the biological definition of gender, or the organization of the church, we're just repeating the treason of Eden all over again.
We are just echoing Adam.
We are saying we know better than the architect who built the house. Let me give you an analogy. True freedom is not the absence of boundaries. True freedom is operating according to your specific design. A train is only free when it stays on the tracks.
Oh, that is a great mental picture.
The tracks limit where the train can go, yes. But when the train decides it wants autonomy, when it demands to be free from the restriction of the steel rails, it jumps the tracks and destroys itself in a field.
It ceases to be a functional train.
It does not find freedom, it finds ruin. Joyful submission to God's total claim over every area of our lives, our gender, our marriages, our money, our time, is the track upon which human flourishing runs.
The modern world literally shouts at us from every screen, every billboard, and every social media feed to exalt ourselves. The message is relentless. Define yourself, avenge yourself, secure your own legacy, build your brand.
It is an exhausting way to live.
It is utterly exhausting to carry that weight, but Christ calls us to take up our cross. He calls us to die to ourselves. I want to shift gears slightly and ask you about corporate worship, because when David was in that cave, he did not just keep his praise isolated to his own journal.
Right. He took it public.
He vowed to praise God among the nations. He wanted his private revelation to become public declaration. How does corporate public praise, gathering on Sunday morning to sing, function as a weapon against the private, isolated fears that dominate the modern age?
Well, private fears absolutely thrive in isolation. When you are alone in your house, alone with your thoughts, the threats against you appear massive.
Your mind just loops over the worst-case scenarios.
Your mind naturally amplifies the danger of your circumstances and minimizes the sovereignty of God. You create an echo chamber of panic. Corporate public praise shatters that isolation.
Because you hear other voices.
Exactly. When you gather with the church on the Lord's Day, and you stand shoulder to shoulder with other believers, and you lift your voices together to sing, "Be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens," you are actively participating in a massive reality check.
A reality check. I love that phrasing.
You are aligning your vocal cords, your mind, and your affections with the objective truth of the cosmos. Public praise is spiritual warfare. It declares to the principalities and powers, it declares to the secular culture outside the doors, and most importantly, it declares to your own anxious heart that King Jesus reigns.
That is a staggering thought to hold on to on a Sunday morning.
It forces the tiny, fearful human ego to step down from the throne and join the massive historical chorus of creatures finding their absolute joy in the glory of the Creator. It's the communal repetition of reality in a world addicted to illusion.
Let us synthesize the massive theological arc we have covered today. We started by diagnosing the disease. The human soul broke when it attempted an ontological coup d'etat in Eden, throwing the entire system into gravitational chaos.
The diagnosis is severe.
We learned that God's self-existent majesty, his aseity, cannot be altered, compromised, or domesticated to fit our pragmatic desires, and that his inflexibility is actually our greatest comfort.
It is the rock we stand on.
We saw in the historical life of David that true faith declares God's supremacy even in the absolute darkest, most terrifying caves of our lives. And we saw that Christ alone, the second Adam, provides the legal pardon and the experiential restoration to put us back in our rightful place as dependent creatures. Because of that finished work, we are called to submit our entire lives, our emails, our families, and our fears to his absolute claim.
The immense weight of this material demands a response from anyone listening. You simply cannot encounter the majestic height of God's sovereignty and remain in a state of neutrality.
You have to make a choice.
You must either continue your futile rebellion, clinging to the illusion of your own autonomy and acting as your own false god, or you must fall on your face, surrender your claims to self-rule, and find your highest, purest honor in being a gladly dependent creature. I want to leave you with a challenging conceptual question to mull over as you go about the rest of your week. When you look at the heaviest burdens in your life right now, the financial anxieties keeping you awake, the fears about your children's future, the career ambitions you are desperately trying to realize, ask yourself who is actually carrying them. If God's glory is the actual unyielding weight, the kaigos holding the entire cosmos together, what happens to the crushing gravitational pull of your own stress when you finally stop trying to hold up the universe yourself, step off the throne, and let him be the center?